I'm going to speak very quickly for 3 reasons. 1, I've got a type A personality and I always talk fast. 2, I've got a 25-minute speech to give in 40 minutes. And 3, people tend to stay awake if I talk fast. So it's great to be back in Goderich. I haven't been here since 1982. I'm from Listowel actually originally, and I spent some time playing football here. It was interesting when I met my wife in 1993. She asked me what the marks were all over my body. And I said, that's from cleats from the boys in Goderich. Okay, I'm going to talk to you about our organization, Long Point Waterfowl. I'll get closer. Long Point Waterfowl. And then I'm going to talk to you about the importance of the lower Great Lakes for waterfowl. And I'm going to talk to you about some of the implications of wind turbine development. And I'm going to talk about some of the research that we do. Okay? So, first of all, we study waterfowl and wetlands throughout the Great Lakes, especially the lower Great Lakes, that being Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, and Lake St. Clair. But more recently, we are studying up through these other lakes as well. We also study non-waterfowl species as well, especially if there's an issue of conservation concern, and I've got graduate students working on other wetland-related projects. And we also mentor our youth. We think that the nature deficit disorder is a very unfortunate thing. Not only are our youth unfit, but our youth are also unconnected with the outdoors, so we spend a lot of time with our youth and trying to introduce them to wildlife biology. And undergraduate education, I teach at the University of Western Ontario. We think it's critically important to teach the kind of the management-based approach to wildlife biology to undergraduate students, so we think that's critically important. And also graduate education, I'm an adjunct at Western, so I've got lots of graduate students. And the beauty of that is myself and all my staff, we're all married, and we won't work 16 hours a day anymore. But we can exploit the youthful enthusiasm of all these people, and they will work 16 hours a day. So it allows us to get a lot more research out, and also what it does is it allows us to put lots of really good ecologists out in the landscape once they're done spending time with us, we hope. So we provide all their funding for the graduate projects, some of which I'll talk about, and we provide all the kind of support, non-financial support as well, and guidance. And we also monitor trends in distribution of abundance of waterfowl. We spend a lot of time flying around the Great Lakes counting ducks, geese, and swans on an annual basis. And the reason I'm telling you this is to, I guess, assure you that we're qualified to do the research that we're doing and make the assertions that we are with respect to industrial wind turbines. And we also make a substantial contribution to science. All the data that we collect is with the express purpose of having that data ultimately published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. And the reason I'm telling you this is we get very upset when we see monitoring reports, whether it be to do with industrial wind turbines or anything else, that are not scientifically sound and make inaccurate assertions. 7, we develop information used for management purposes, and we contribute to conservation. So that's one of the reasons we're involved with this issue, because we think it's a very important issue. So what we do, one of the reasons we've been so successful in getting money for our research is we do applied research. We answer questions that we think are critically important for the management of waterfowl and wetlands on the lower Great Lakes. So what we do is we talk to organizations like all these, people like yourselves, and we find out what the critical questions are, and then we go and answer them. And quite often these organizations will give us money to assist with the finances of those projects. So now I'm going to talk about the importance of the lower Great Lakes for waterfowl, because a lot of people don't realize just how important it is. Now we've got this Atlantic flyway here. We've got millions of birds coming up from the Atlantic coast, the Caribbean, down Florida way, and they're crossing through the Great Lakes. And so they're crossing through here, they're resting, they're putting on body fat, they're getting ready for the next leg of migration, and also getting ready for reproduction. So it's critically important for the acquisition of fat, the feeding, and the resting, and getting ready to move on. And we also have a Mississippi flyway here, where we have this crossroads, and we have lots of birds coming up from the Gulf Coast that end up usually breeding up in this area as well. So again, a critically important area for migratory waterfowl. So if we look at numbers of birds using the Great Lakes, first of all, spring migration, we've got about 7 million birds coming here. It's kind of hard to count birds during migration because they roll over, but we think we have about 7 million ducks, geese, and swans coming through. If we look at breeding, we only have about 1.3 million pairs. So relative to staging, there's not that many birds. And people think, well, maybe there's a deficiency with respect to the habitat here in the lower Great Lakes. There really isn't. What it is most of the species that come through here, the Great Lakes is outside their core breeding range. So they winter, say, in the Atlantic coast, and they breed in the Arctic. Still critically important for them, they just don't happen to breed here. We have lots of mallards and wood ducks and Canada geese that do breed here. Fall migration, we have about 12.8 million birds, so a substantial number of birds come through in the fall, and we get lots of people asking, well, how could there be twice as many birds? These things are very fecund, or they have a very high rate of reproductive output, so the fall flight is about half juveniles. So again, this shows that the Great Lakes is continentally significant for waterfowl, and we have a responsibility to protect not only the waterfowl, but also the wetlands so that they use. And wintering, there's over 1 million birds wintering in the Great Lakes now, and it's really increased substantially over the last 20 years. A number of reasons. One, zebra mussels have provided a readily available food source for molluscivorous waterfowl, and our research has shown that it's actually not problematic for them. We thought that maybe it was, but it's really not. The other one is this warming trend, whatever you want to call it. We've got more open water, and we've got less snow cover combined with zero-till and minimum tills. We've got more waste agricultural grains and better access to those grains because we've got less snow. So we've got a more benign winter environment for waterfowl, and why migrate any further south if you don't have to? So again, it makes it that much more continentally significant. And so a lot of people don't realize the importance with respect to biodiversity as well, the number of species we have coming through the Great Lakes. Because a lot of people don't get down to those coastal areas and see them. And a lot of these birds are offshore birds, but unless you get out in a boat or an aircraft, you're not even going to know they're there. So we get 29 species, 9 species of dabbling ducks, 2 species of geese, 2 species of native swans, and 6 species of diving ducks, and 9 species of sea ducks. You guys see me okay now? We're close enough to this? Everybody's good? Okay, good. So threats to Great Lakes waterfowl. So kind of our historic threats were one, wetland loss. And wetland loss was certainly a major threat that started really right after European settlement. We drained 90% of the wetlands associated with coastal wetlands and about 90% of our inland wetlands. So it's not as big a threat today as it was in the past, largely because a lot of the wetlands are easily drained, have been drained, and there's some protective measures in place now to prevent drainage. There still is some going on, but the big thing is that which remains is critically important that not only we study it, but we protect it and we enhance it. Okay, whether that be from invasive species or industrial wind turbines, we have to be very careful with what we have left because it's critically important because all these birds are crammed into 10% of the habitat. Invasive species is also an issue, and it always will be an issue. It's been an issue since European settlement, especially once we started bringing ships up the St. Lawrence River. And it's going to continue to be a problem. We spend a lot of time studying invasive species. Contaminants, certainly a problem, was a bigger problem back in the 60s and 70s when the lower Great Lakes were almost dead. They're much better now. We've got lots of protective measures in place so that lakes are cleaner than they were in the past. And our cormorant populations are testament to that because they're doing really well. They didn't do well because of contaminants back in the 60s and 70s. And so the newest threat to Great Lakes waterfowl, we feel, is improperly placed industrial wind turbines. So again, improperly placed industrial wind turbines. And that's both onshore and offshore that we'll deal with. However, I'm a waterfowl ecologist. Our mandate is waterfowl and wetlands, so that's really just one of the concerns. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce 12 concerns, which I'm not really qualified to deal with. Each one of those concerns, you can have an entire one-day conference on them, or maybe a week conference and discuss them, because there's lots of issues there. So I'm going to introduce them, but then I'm going to talk about waterfowl, because that's where our mandate and our expertise is. So the first issue is economics. A lot of people ask me about this, but the best way for me to put it is Denmark's got 25,000 wind turbines. Their express purpose for having them was to close down fossil fuel burning plants. They've never closed down a single one. They've got the most expensive power in Europe, and they just recently decided to remove all the subsidies for wind turbines in that country. My other concern is the getting rid of them after. There seems to be no provision for decommissioning. You're already seeing lots of sale of companies, and we've seen other places in the world where we've got these things sitting and not being removed. So that's certainly a concern. Our next one is human health, and this is certainly an issue down where we are because we've got some turbines really closely associated with human habitation. And it's been likened to, say, seasickness. You put 1,000 people on a ship, and maybe only 50 will get sick, but they will get really sick. It's a major issue for them. Same thing with the wind turbines. You put wind turbines close to people's houses, some people are going to get sick, and they're going to get really sick. Anesthetics is also an issue, and it's especially an issue if you've got a human health problem and you want to sell your home. We've got some empty homes sitting down in the Clear Creek area. People too sick to be in their homes, and they can't sell them. Contaminant upwelling is also an issue with respect to offshore turbines. We have lots of contaminants associated with sediment, and there's lots of pile drive that they put these things in, so there's some concerns there. Also fisheries issues. There's a lot of rubble associated with the bases of these things, And what happens is that from what they've seen in marine environments, and they think will probably happen in freshwater environments, is it'll attract invasive species like zebra mussels and brown gobies and things like that. I think that black bass populations will go up and yellow perch populations will go down, and then it'll attract fish and fishermen, and so it might disrupt the system. So there are some concerns there. One of the big concerns is the underwater cables and the impact that those things might have on underwater acoustics. Habitat loss and fragmentation is certainly an issue. We know that we lose, I think it's 2 hectares or 3 hectares or maybe acres, I can't remember now. It hasn't been as big an issue here in Canada, but it's certainly an issue in the US where they're putting these things into bush lots. So what happens is you lose a bunch of bush cover, not only from the turbines, but also from the access roads and what have you. The other thing is fragmentation. We have lots of species that really prefer large contiguous bush lots. You start breaking them up, they're no longer, it doesn't present really good habitat for those species. Next one is monarch butterflies, and this is one that I'm really concerned about. Again, I'm not a monarch butterfly biologist, but I live down in Port Rowan area, the Simcoe area, which is kind of the last stop before these things cross the lake in the fall. We get thousands, millions of them during that migration. We know monarch butterflies aren't doing very well continentally, and we know that monarch butterflies don't avoid anything. And they're susceptible to wind change. If you see one go over the windscreen of your car, and if it doesn't hit your car, often it rolls up and dies behind your car. So I've got concerns there. You'll see it especially when I talk about offshore turbines in a couple of minutes, just how many there will be out the lake if they put out as many as they'd like to. Sound impacts is also an issue, or no, a potential issue. So intraspecifically, it's a potential issue. That's within species, so within species communications. And also interspecifically, so between species communications, whether that be predator-prey relations or what have you. I do a lot of hunting. A lot of my friends do a lot of hunting. And some of my friends that hunt closely associated with wind turbines have told me that they have a hard time communicating with the hunters while they're out there in these bush lots because of the noise of the turbines. And they're also concerned because anecdotally there's some suggestions that wildlife populations decline in these areas. So research hasn't been done that I know of, but we certainly need more research in that regard. Bat mortality overall, if you look at mortality of all the different species, well, except for monarchs, you probably lose a lot more monarchs than bats. But if we look at birds and mammals, the one that we're most concerned about is bats, because a lot more bats get killed than birds. And we don't have that many bat species, we don't have a good handle on populations. And what happens is not only they get hit by the blade, I've seen thermal imagery where the blade hits them, but they also get near the tip of the blade, and that's where the wind speed changes really quickly, and what it does is it bursts the capillaries in their lungs, and it kills them. So there's certainly issues there. Plus, they're very hard to find after they've been killed, so we don't even know if our estimates of that mortality are all that good. Passerine mortality and displacement is certainly an issue, especially as far as passerine or songbird mortality. If we're losing some grackles and some starlings and stuff like that, really, who cares? But if we start losing species at risk, then we've certainly got an issue there. And certainly as we funnel down through southern Ontario, we get into closer to more and more species at risk. The other one is displacement. Excuse me. We know that our grassland songbirds in North America aren't doing nearly as well as they had in the past. And there's been some recent research that's shown that grasslands that have wind turbines have less ground nesting songbirds. So there's certainly some concern there, especially if you marry that up with ethanol production. And we're losing lots and lots of our grasslands due to ethanol production. Right now we're feeding more corn to ethanol and we're feeding the cattle in the United States. So. Okay, next one is raptor mortality, and this is certainly a major issue in some areas. Altamont Pass in California loses 5,000 raptors per year. And down at Long Point, we've lost one bald eagle already. We don't really have that many turbines yet, so there's certainly issues there. And Wolf Island had a pretty big raptor kill as well. Now that brings us to waterfowl displacement, where our expertise lies, and this is what the rest of my talk is going to be about. So if we look at the Canadian side of the Great Lakes, we've got these high waterfowl use areas. And the problem being, especially initially, all the proposed turbines are really going into these high waterfowl use areas because they're also the high wind areas. You'll see it in a few minutes, and actually you guys have seen it here. If all these turbines go in, the whole of the lower Great Lakes will be ringed with turbines anyways, but we're certainly in a collision course, we feel, between turbines and waterfowl, largely because of inadequate regulations for placement of these things. So we'll talk about onshore first, and then we'll talk about offshore, because they're two pretty different things. So I was lucky enough to go to Denmark about 6 years ago. And this is when we thought that selenium from fossil fuel burning was adversely affecting waterfowl in the Great Lakes. We spent about $1 million studying it. We realized that it didn't, but at that time we thought that it was problematic. So while I was in Denmark for a migration conference, I took the advantage and went out and spent some time with a biologist that deals with placing wind turbines in Denmark. And there, they have 2 or 3, sometimes 4 years of pre-construction monitoring. They're very careful about where they put them. Here, we don't have that. So I spent some time with them, and I came home with some recommendations because I knew we were going to have turbines coming into North America and Ontario. So his first recommendation was, do not place wind farms within 1,000 meters of waterfowl roosting sites. Okay, so roosting sites being where they rest, specifically during migration. So not every little roosting site, you don't have to protect every single one, but Hullet and Luther and all of our coastal wetlands, because we've lost 90% of them, we shouldn't have turbines within a kilometer. I'd rather, based on our research, I'd rather see 2 kilometers, but they said at least a kilometer from those areas. Also, do not place wind farms in flight corridors between roosting and feeding areas. Lots of waterfowl species fly from these wetlands twice a day, and they fly in and feed on agricultural grains. And they become very dependent on those agricultural grains. They require them, especially during spring migration. So we don't want to have turbines along these important habitat areas and in those corridors. The next one is do not place wind farms in agricultural fields traditionally used by large flocks of waterfowl. Now this is meant to represent Buick swans in Denmark, but it's actually snow geese in Nebraska. It's kind of the same. You guys probably can't tell from there because it's a long ways away. But this is what it looked like when I was there. And so what they found in Denmark was the big agricultural fields that were close to these wetlands were critically important nutritionally for these birds. They fly these closely associated wetlands, especially during poor weather. They don't want to fly 5 or 10 kilometers, so they fly inland and feed, and then fly back to the safety of the roosting area. And so that it was important nutritionally, but also very important from an ecotourism perspective, because people went out and looked at these things all the time. People love swans. You know, if swans arrive in this area when they get here, everybody's really excited. They're a great bird. And so what they found was, if they put turbines in these large fields that were used by Buick swans, they found that the large flocks didn't use those fields anymore. What happened was they get some family groups using them, but not the large flocks so the importance of those fields declined. It really represents habitat loss and ecotourism loss. And Buick swans that are in Denmark are the closest relative of our tundra swan you guys get here. So they're very similar species, almost the same species. So then I came back to Canada, and again, I wasn't sure about these wind turbines yet, and you know, I was waiting for it to happen, and but wasn't really investigating it yet. So then it actually came to me. I didn't have to go to it. So one of the proponents, I'm not going to mention the name, they proposed a wind farm down in this area west of Long Point, and they came to us and asked if we had any data and any concerns. And I said, from a waterfowl perspective, I don't have any concerns and I don't have any data. It's all bluffs, there's no wetlands down there. Doesn't mean there's not concerns as far as raptors or bats or songbirds or whatever, but from a waterfowl perspective, I don't need to get involved. So then what they did was they added phase 2, which brought them right to the base of Long Point. And this is all tundra swans at the base of Long Point. So what they were going to do is they were going to violate all 3 of the Danish recommendations with respect to placement of wind turbines and impacts on waterfowl. So that's when I became involved. I went to town council and I spoke out against it. Town council wanted to shoot me because they wanted as many wind turbines as possible at that time, 6 years ago. You didn't know what you didn't know. If people don't read about this stuff, you don't know what you don't know. Now they're pushing for a moratorium, so it's certainly changed. But so what happened? I went to the proponent, and it worked out great. Town council wanted to shoot me, but the proponent thought, well, you know, we should deal with this guy, and you know, maybe we should shut him up. And we won't. They decided not to put them at the base of Long Point. So our turbines are 2 or 3 kilometers from the base of Long Point. Otherwise, they would have been right at Long Point. So I left that meeting with a real warm and fuzzy, thinking we're going to be able to deal with industrial wind turbine companies. Well, it changed with the creation of the Green Energy Act. What the Green Energy Act did was a number of things. It provided insufficient regulations, guidelines, lots and lots of incentive to feed in tariff, and lots of competition between companies. All of a sudden, I couldn't deal with wind turbine companies anymore, and had a very difficult time influencing the decision-making with respect to where to place these things, especially down Lake St. Clair. Then, the Ministry of Natural Resources came out with this bird and bird habitat guidelines for wind power projects. When this came out, I thought, this is great. The ministry, whose job is to protect our wildlife and our wetlands, are going to have adequate guidelines so that these things will not go in areas that I have to get involved. And I can go around, do the rest of my job and get away from wind turbines. I don't want to deal with wind turbines, but unfortunately I have to. So when I read this, I was very dismayed, because what it does is actually, the purpose of this document, I feel, is to facilitate industrial wind turbine development and allow them to go in places they really shouldn't. And I'll show you some examples here. 120 meters setback from significant wildlife habitat. So as long as you're 120 meters from significant wildlife habitat, they don't have to do any natural heritage assessment. This isn't fully approved yet, but this looks like where it's going to go, and this is what they're doing down at Lake St. Clair. They're proposing these turbines very close to wetlands. So 120 meters the length of the football field. And at less than 120 meters, they can conduct a natural heritage assessment, so they can possibly put the turbines right in the habitats or right closely associated with them. So there's really no protection whatsoever, especially when you take into consideration that industrial wind turbine companies hire their own consultants. And this is also when we became involved, because I haven't really seen any industrial wind any consultant reports that I felt were adequate. And I could talk for a long time about that, but I don't have time. They're not adequate. And the bird habitat assessment process requires post-construction monitoring of age and mortality, but does not require an adequate assessment of displacement. Nobody seems concerned about displacement. The number of turbines you guys have proposed here, I'd be really concerned about displacement as well as mortality. The other one is cumulative impacts of onshore and offshore IWTs have not been considered. I'm going to talk about onshore here. We'll come to offshore in a few minutes. Or offshore in a few minutes. This is the red is the turbine farms, whatever you want to call them, that have been built, they're in operation. Yellow is the ones that have been proposed or are in construction. So there's a lot of turbine farms there. And that's not individual turbines, that's turbine farms. So if we look here, this is Grand River down in Port Dover near where we are. So again, lots of turbines and no assessment of cumulative effects, additive effects. When are we going to have an additive effect? And what's the cutoff number for these things? Not only on a county basis, but on a Southern Ontario basis, on a lake-wide basis. The states aren't dealing with each other. There's no assessment whatsoever of cumulative effects. This is Prince Edward County, also an important bird area. Lots of industrial wind turbines that are proposed are going in, and also our offshore here. And here's your area here. Again, I was really amazed when I saw the number of turbines. I didn't realize there were that many. Also, the guidelines don't consider bird mortality to be significant until 18 birds per turbine per year are killed, and that's 7.2 times the North American average. So I kept asking, what's your biological justification for this number? And I could never get a biological justification. I think what it is at Wolf Island, they came up with about 13 and a half to 14 birds killed per turbine per year, one of the worst wind farms in North America, and then they added buffer so that we wouldn't have to mitigate. So there's really no biological justification whatsoever. I'm going to skip over this one in the interest of time. I'm certainly concerned for raptors, especially bald eagles down where we are. And so what happens is we get maps like this, like Bob showed. Somebody looks at this and thinks, well, that's not a real problem. And because they put the turbines on here, you can't really see them. They put a bunch of other crap on there, and then you really can't see the extent of the turbines. So if we look at this area here, this is the northeast corner of Lake St. Clair, one of the most important waterfowl staging areas in North America, and certainly likely the most important or second most important in Canada. And just blow it up here. This is Walpole Island over here. There's a significant wildlife habitat, and there's all the turbines that are being proposed. So it really violates all three of the Danish recommendations. And this is the exact same proponent that I dealt with at Long Point that now won't deal with me any longer. And it sets a bad precedent here. This is the Hunt Club. They drained both of these cells. All these wetlands are diked. So they drained them, and now they're going to put industrial wind turbines in them. So again, it sets a really bad precedent because most of the wetlands at Lake St. Clair are diked and are easily drained. And it's very high quality farmland. So Long Point Waterfowl research pertaining to onshore turbines and waterfowl, what we've done is we're doing some new research. It's very expensive, a lot of it's satellite tracking, but we're also doing some retrospective analyses of data that we already had, which is great because we've already paid for the data, and if we can use it to assess potential impacts of wind turbines, it's perfect. We're golden. So this is how it works, and I'm going to go through a few projects quickly. We catch a bird, in this case a tundra swan. We put a satellite transmitter, in this case a net collar attached transmitter, and then there's three satellites that orbit the globe, and they orbit the globe circumpolarly, 850 kilometers off the Earth's surface, and when they travel within 5,000 kilometers of your bird, whatever it is, they transfer a latitude and longitude to Atlanta or Maryland, and then back to our computer. So once we get the transmitter on, we never have to see the bird again. And we've put, I don't know, probably 100 of these things on. They cost $3,000 each, and it ends up costing at least $5,000 per bird, so we spend a lot of money on this over time. So initially what we did, we wanted to look at migration corridors of tundra swans, because nobody ever done that before. We kind of knew where they went, but we didn't know how they spent time across the North American landscape. So I tracked some birds about a decade or so ago, and one of my colleagues did the same thing about 8 years ago. But we didn't look at habitat use. So this was a perfect opportunity now to take that data and actually specifically look at habitat use and maybe try to have an impact on regulations or placement of wind turbines, especially within our province. So this is what, and we just started this. I took on Caitlin Weaver as a master's student, and she actually hasn't even officially started. She's an employee right now. But we pulled some of the data just to show you guys, give you an idea. This is the locations of birds. What they do is they come up the Atlantic coast, and then they go up to the Arctic. So this is how they spend where they spend their time in Ontario. And so hopefully we'll be able to, one, identify key wetlands, but also identify how far inland these things fly to feed, where those key agricultural fields are, and maybe make some recommendations. And again, that unfortunately overlaps very well with the wind turbine proposals. And same thing with cranes. We put some transmitters on them and track them, and we're going to be able to make some recommendations for Wolf Island as well, because there's lots of turbines being proposed for Wolf Island. So another grad student, Everett Anna. So offshore wind turbines is a very different thing, and there's been some research done on wind turbines offshore obviously in Europe, because that's the only place we have offshore turbines. And what they did was they took this industrial wind farm here before it went in, and they counted waterfowl. And then they counted waterfowl after it went in. They showed a 4.5-fold decline in waterfowl use of the wind farm itself. And then they used thermal imagery and showed that these birds went around the wind farm. And they concluded that this was a good thing because they're not being killed. And it is a good thing because it doesn't take much energy to fly around a small wind farm like that in a really big ocean. But again, they've only got about 1,200 wind turbines in that really big ocean, so there's not much to fly around. Now, if we look at the offshore lease applications just for Lake Erie and Lake St. Clair, there's a moratorium on offshore right now, but there was a moratorium put on offshore prior to the 2007 election, and then it was lifted. And we've seen the same, a moratorium, so it could very easily be lifted again. It's happened before. So prior to the moratorium, this was the offshore lease applications. So if birds react the same way in freshwater as they do in marine water, we're going to see a lot of barrier effects in this area. This turbine farm here is 85 kilometers long. It's between 500 and 800 turbines, between 500 and 800, and it's perpendicular to the migratory movements of everything, bats, waterfowl, loons, everything that crosses that lake. So we're really concerned about barrier effects. And there's the New York turbines. I don't have the turbines proposed for down here, but we know that Ohio's going to be first. They're actually putting a factory in to build them, and they're going to have lots of them. So the lake will be possibly covered with turbines once we're done. And then if we have the onshore, the Canadian side, and I don't have the onshore on the US side, so we're looking at a lot of turbines. And again, no assessment of cumulative effects. And there's Lake St. Clair, again, the Canadian offshore lease applications. The one I showed you earlier was up in this area here. The most important canvasback staging area in Canada, probably the second most in North America. And so Long Point Waterfowl research pertaining to offshore wind turbines and waterfowl, but we've always flown surveys around the Great Lakes and counted birds, but we've always flown in single-engine aircraft, so we can't fly way up the lake. It's illegal to do, and it's unsafe to do, and it's very expensive to get the proper aircraft. But when we fly these shoreline surveys, we see all these birds way out in the lake. So we wanted to get a better handle on overall numbers of birds using the lake and get a handle on how far out they're going. So what we did, I should go back for a second, we got a helicopter on floats, and very expensive, and we flew shoreline 2-kilometer, 4-kilometer, 10-kilometer surveys. And we did it 4 times one winter, and this is the average. So there's about 100,000 birds there. So 60,000 or 60% of the birds are along the shore. No big surprise. That's all your swans, your geese, your dabbling ducks. So we certainly, as you get offshore, you get into these sea ducks and diving ducks. So we certainly have a concern that's anything within 5 or 10 kilometers, because not only would it affect movements, but also foraging habitat as well. Then we figured, well, we needed to track some birds like we've done with onshore. And so now we're into diving duck and sea duck tracking. Very difficult to catch these things, and it costs us a lot of money trying to catch them in open water. So, and with these, we can't put the transmitters on the leg, we can't put them on the neck. Necks are too short, legs are too short. We can't strap them on because it affects their waterproofing. So we have to surgically implant them and then have an external antenna. So we get a wellhead to do it. And there's an X-ray of the transmitter right there. So I took on Phil Wilson as an MSc candidate. He just started this year. And what he's doing is he's tracking long-tailed ducks, or formerly old squaw, on Lake Ontario, and looking at how they move around Lake Ontario, especially in respect to turbine proposals and bathymetry, water depth, and stuff like that. So this shows the movements of one of his birds in eastern Lake Ontario, and there's lots of turbines proposed for this area because it's fairly shallow. And this just shows some of the migratory movements as Phil's birds are going north. And we're doing the same thing with SCOP as well. We tracked about 55 birds for an unrelated project a number of years ago. We're doing a retrospective analysis. And this just shows some of the data for a few birds for a few months back in 2007. So we'll be able to determine where the birds are in the lake, how they move around, how far out the lake they go, when they go to the lake, and again, make recommendations. So we're tracking quite a number of species, spent a lot of money on this. We haven't received any money from the industrial wind turbine companies. It's all come. Actually, it was funny because the last time I gave this talk, somebody asked me the same question. I had people put up their hands. And so wind turbine companies not giving us any money. Government giving us about 10%. Environmentalists and environmental companies giving us 0. And conservation-based groups like Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters and hunters are paying for 90% of this because it's interesting, for every $1 that's given by the general public to conservation, hunters give 12. So and I'm our primary fundraiser, when I want to get money, I go hit up the hunting community, so they've been very generous. So overall, just to finish off here, will this research impact decisions pertaining to IWT development in the Lower Great Lakes region? We'd like to think we're going to spend probably $1 million at least studying these birds. Are we going to make a difference? Well, it really comes down to the cogitative timeline, which is problematic. That's the timeline of interest between politicians and ecologists. If we look at short term, sorry, my thing got shifted here, but short term is 5 p.m. today for a politician. I don't really think beyond that. Ecologists, we generally in the short term, we think about years and decades because 1 year really doesn't tell you anything. You need multiple years of study because there's so much annual variability. And then if we look at long term, 4 years for a politician, they never think beyond that. And then ecologists, we think in decades and centuries. However, if we look at the environment right now, and what's going on now, long term for politicians is 6th of October, and for us it's years, because it takes us some years to get this research done and get it published in a peer-reviewed journal, because lots of people won't listen to you until it's actually published in a peer-reviewed journal. So lots going to happen between now and October the 6th. No offshore development in Canada will happen because of the moratorium. I know, and I won't get into the politics of it, but the onshore, it's business as usual between now and October the 6th, and it sounds like there's going to be lots and lots of construction between now and then, because they can take advantage of the feed-in tariff. So we're in a race against time ourselves to try and get this stuff out as soon as possible, so we can potentially have an influence or an impact on where these things are placed. And with that, I'll say thank you, and questions at the end? Or? Yeah. Thank you.